At the time of filming, I may very well be wearing one of my newest t-shirts. And when I saw it, I made a text immediately. I told someone in the arena, working, getting a paycheck, yo, bring me home this one. And yeah, what's your address? When I saw this, no, I was not at Elimination Chamber in Toronto, but to see that it looked like the Maple Leafs, when I see things that remind me of Canada and WWE, you have two of my most favorite things. This is gonna be my prize t-shirt. I do think it fits kinda okay, but I'm still gonna leave the sleeves on it unless my guy would have sent me two. I always wish sometimes I get two pairs of shoes or two shirts so I could wear one and keep one somewhere, but anyway. I've talked about this before, I'm gonna talk about it here. Somebody actually just chose this as we're filming what I should talk about. The realities of trigger point, and they are real, and it is outrageous, it is ridiculous, it is obscene, it is absurd to say that trigger points don't exist. We were talking recently about my friend Alec Kraz, that's not his last name, I don't know how to say it, Krasinski, it's not John Krasinski. We were talking about hypostable versus hypermobile, different topic, but it came from the same seminar where I believe I was in some of those other posts I talked about. There's some individuals that are very influential in the UK that would say trigger points don't exist. So, you know, we talk about like, okay, if I put my thumb in the back of your shoulder and you feel it here, etc., what would your guy call it? Oh, well, it's a neurological phenomenon. We're going to talk about neurological phenomenon. We're not talking necessarily about dry needling. We might have some other posts that tack on to this. I think the lesson here is just because you don't know the research exists, that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And that does not give somebody the warranty or power, much less to be confused why they even care, but to say that something doesn't exist just because, again, you don't know the research exists. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the research that does exist and how it's probably not a study that says X tested double blind Y. It's more of some sequential things that were done in a particular way that would 100% support the realities of a trigger point. And what you choose to do about it is your business. You can treat trigger points with needles, you can treat them with thumbs, you can treat them with developmental kinesiology, you can treat them by putting peanut butter on them, whatever works. But let's start first by, before we are going to qualify what is or isn't a trigger point and does it exist, what is? Number one, it is an area that has excessive tenderness. So if I push someplace and you feel discomfort more than normal, it's hypersensitive, that is one box that has to be checked. That alone does not make it a trigger point. I think a lot of people would say, oh, that's a trigger point. And these are people that are probably dumb to begin with. Not you, because you would never be dumb watching my videos. But it has to be that. Maybe you would call, if it was just that, you would call it a tender point. In Asian medicine, maybe it would be a very common shi point, but it is not a trigger point. Number two, for it to be a trigger point, you have to feel something that is a taut band. Taut, not something that you learned, but something that would be very, very tight. Something that's taut. Number three, it has to twitch. So when you rub over this highly sensitive taut band, it creates a little bit of a twitch. Not the twitch sign that you would see when you drop a needle into it, but something that goes bloop, bloop, bloop. And it has to have all three of those things for it to qualify as a trigger point. And then number four, when you do apply some extended pressure of unknown duration, okay? You might not have held it there long enough. Does it create a familiar referral pattern? Meaning, is that your pain? So indeed, there's a map that goes all the way back to Manel, Travell and Simons, the flip cards, which we would probably find from a Western model, the trigger point that is probably the most popular. We would find some really brilliant clinicians, Rizopoulos and Kostopoulos, those two dudes out of Queens. Hands-on therapy, not the best courses in the world. I've taken many, more of how they're proctored, not so much the information. That book and their posters would probably be the absolute best that I have ever seen, and I will continue to take their courses and walk out if the proctor is a jerk like there was one time. Actually, I think it wasn't his course, they were just hosting it. The first reality that I think you should be aware of when it comes to trigger points is that there is only intra-rater reliability. You might find some research that says, no, we can find intra-rater reliability of the trap, but that's only one place, and the trap does seem to be this epicenter of trigger point type of research, but I'm going to go with there's only intra-rater reliability, meaning if I say it's there and then I come back in the room, I say it's there. I'm not wrong. I'm not saying it's there and then I say it's over here. That's not how it works. But it would not be the case where if I say it's here, I leave the room and then someone else says it's also right there. That doesn't happen. So I think that challenges, and if that means that from the highest level of scientific merit, we can't say that trigger points exist because it doesn't have inter-rater reliability, you win. Cuff me. I'm going. I'm out. Okay? But we're going to go another step further to qualify at least what that one individual is talking about, because I'm also looking at things from a perspective of, does it really matter? At some point, it's like this seesaw. If you're doing something and the person is improved to a desirable fashion and moves on to the next stage of progressive levels of adaptation. So anyway, so this is, I think some people maybe have seen me done this in the past, but I'm going to start to move around. Don't get dizzy. Okay? So if I'm part of this study that can be replicated, I'm going to say the trigger point's right there. Why? Because it's tender, it's a top band, it's a twitch, and it's got a common referral. So intra-rater reliability means I leave the room and I come back in the room and I say it's right there, and someone else judges, did I hit the same spot? That way, it's not like, yeah, I'm putting it at the same spot, because I have to then treat it. So intra-rater reliability, good. Now here's what you don't have. I say it's right there, leave the room, and now evil Charlie enters the room. This is somebody else. He's gonna say it's over here, okay? Now, so that doesn't happen. But now there's critical research that I'm alluding to before, where if somebody doesn't know it exists, like some goofy dude from the UK who insists that trigger points don't exist, I invite them to look up the names Sikdar, S-I-K-D-A-R, and Jay Shah. And indeed, a lot of the trigger point literature from Damerholt, Sikdar, Shah comes out of the NIH, because as I referenced earlier, Janet Travell, who was the White House physician for JFK, I don't think anybody invented trigger points, but more or less made them very, very popular. So you see an epicenter of research in the DMV area of these types of things. So these are stuff from NIH. You could argue, please don't compare NIH to other things that have N in them, but this is some high level stuff, okay? So now I say it's right here. And then I go and tell Sikdar exactly where it is. So now I'm going to put on my Sikdar hat, and I'm going to come in, and I have the highest level of musculoskeletal ultrasound. And Sikdar says, Charlie, where was it? Right there. He said, okay. So he's going to start to ultrasound right here. And up on the screen, he's going to say, hey, you know what? I'm also ultrasounding here where Charlie didn't say. And I ultrasound over here where Charlie didn't say. Where Charlie said, that clearly looks like something. I don't know what it is. I'm not saying that it's painful, sensitive, top band, twitch, and referral. I'm just saying wherever Charlie said it was, 10 times out of 10, that clearly looks different than these other places. Next. So now Sikdar leaves the room, and then Jay Shah enters the room. And he doesn't talk to me. He talks to Sikdar, and he says, Doc, where was that thing that you found on ultrasound? The thing that Charlie said if he does some type of treatment for it, he can help this patient do other things more desirably. That's what this is all about. It says it's right here. Jay Shah takes a big ass needle and pulls the blood, pulls the milieu out of that area of the tissue. Also pulls it out of the other area. The milieu of the trigger point that was confirmed to be a real thing is far more acidotic, a lower pH than the other area. So it's a real thing. You can call it neurological phenomenon, call it a trigger point, but the reality of its existence is actually very, very confirmed and very, very evidence-based. What you do about it, including nothing, is totally within your purview. What I don't think is in your purview is to say trigger points don't exist. That would be false. If you just didn't know the research exists, oh man, I dropped the ball on that one. Now, do you want to call it something different? You call it whatever you want, but then that gets into this whole issues of semantics, where does this individual in the UK actually believe in trigger points, knew he was wrong, so he has to save face and ego so that he calls it a neurological phenomenon instead of a trigger point, rather than focused on, hey, this is something, let's now study how do we mitigate these things that we're finding on physical exam so that this person may have less pain, may have better extensibility, mobility, whatever, how the impact is, so that they can train their ass off and improve tolerance of buffering or staving off acidosis, which is really a big key for me into championing things like anti-glycolytic training.